Now to Project 61. This past winter, while I was acting as Interim Executive Director, received a call from Maureen about the Richard C. Reed architectural series that she has been sponsoring for the past 6 years. She had two ideas for this year's event. One was to focus on a particular architect, and I've frankly forgotten who that was. You don't remember either, okay. The other was a project that Richard had been involved with over 60 years ago, fondly known as Project 61. She had a collection of sketches that her husband had done for that project and thought those drawings could be a topic of interest and the basis for this evening's talk. She has since donated those drawings to the library archives, and the ones that you were looking at back on the table are not the originals. Those are scans that were done, so feel free to take a look at those if you didn't have a chance to do that earlier. I remember Project 61. I was a senior in high school at the time, and although not a resident of Carlisle, I lived in Penn Township. I remember following with interest the story of how Carlisle was attempting to revise its downtown commercial appearance. I always had an interest in architecture and was particularly attracted to the older structures throughout Cumberland County. I need to immediately clarify that I am not an architect. I'm an amateur historian. And I told Maureen that I thought I could do this lecture, so that's how you ended up with me. So here we are today with my report on what Project 61 was, how it developed, and to what degree, if any, it still is impacting Carlisle today. The building that Maureen's daughter Carol put on the postcard that many of you received is shown on the screen. That's an example of what Richard Reed's drawings look like. It is at 151 South Hanover Street. It is typical of the drawings made for this project, with small paned windows, doors and storefronts that follow the colonial theme envisioned by Project 61 planners. I will wait until the end of this lecture to reveal what happened to that building. What was Carlisle like in 1961? There was no Interstate 81. That was coming later in the decade. The old market house on the square had been torn down, and the new courthouse on the site was under construction. That new courthouse design followed a colonial or early American theme. Two new interior shopping malls had been built on the edge of town. The downtown shopping district, however, was still in operation, although the impact of the malls was beginning to be felt. And visits to Williamsburg were a popular destination for travelers. Business and government interests were looking at how to maintain and, in some cases, revitalize the downtown. An effort in Blair County in Hollidaysburg attracted local interest and showed some promise. An architectural professor at Penn State University, Dr. Milton Osborne, worked with leaders in Hollidaysburg to develop a downtown revitalization, which they call Project 60. They got started a year before we did. Newspapers in Pittsburgh and Everett in western Pennsylvania reported on the Hollidaysburg effort. Revitalization included adding items like shutters, iron railings, using smaller paned windows, adding gas lights, awnings, modifying paint colors, and landscaping using trees and shrubs. Colonial style signage was also recommended. Articles in newspapers, as noted, included one in the Harrisburg Patriot News. This was observed by Frankie Maslin Jr. This report from the Carlisle Borough summarizes the early history of the project. In the spring of 1961, Maslin called together a group of 40 civic leaders and senior citizens. They met at the Maslin Carpet Company site at the Cameron Mansion at Kings Gap. From that group, a committee of 12 was formed, headed by William Hartzell, the mayor, and Jimmy C. George. They arranged for photos to be taken of 172 buildings in a 7-block area of the downtown. Some of those buildings had recently been remodeled, and others either already had an early American appearance, or it was felt that they didn't qualify for revitalization for some reason. The project was then scaled back to 122 buildings. Dr. Osborne from Penn State, who had assisted with the Hollidaysburg project, agreed to assist with the conceptual drawings, as did local architect Richard C. Reed, thus the source of the drawings that Maureen shared with me back in January. We don't have any direct access to the Osborne drawings, but fortunately, many of them appeared in newspaper articles, as you will see in subsequent slides during this presentation. If anyone is aware of any of the Osborne drawings, please let us know. And we would love to add to our collection if you're aware of any of those original drawings. They will give us a more complete collection of items related to Project 61. The official name of the committee was the Carlisle Beautification and Restoration Project, known in short as Project 61. By September 1st, Osborne and Reed had completed their drawings. It's amazing to me that drawings as complex as those are got completed in such a short period of time. And a public meeting was held to share those drawings with the community, the property owners, and the tenants whose businesses were located in some of the buildings. A colonial sign was designed to designate those businesses that were pursuing the project on their buildings. One of those signs is on display in the case at the back of the room. Each owner of one of the participating owners was provided with one of those signs if they agreed to participate in the project. Newspaper articles in August and September shared the project plans with the community. The August article lists the members of the committee, and you'll hear some familiar names as I tell you a little about some of the articles that I was able to find doing a newspapers.com search. William Hartzell, the mayor, as mentioned, and Jimmy George were co-chairs, along with Dr. Osborne from the School of Architecture at Penn State. Other members of the committee included George Wickard, Robert Einstein, Richard Duttry, Richard Reed, John Bruges, George Lehman, Frank McCrae, Bearden Kunkel, James Kostopoulos, Robert Manning, Millard Landis, Roger St. Germain, and Raymond Bobb Jr., all familiar names to those of you who have been part of the society for many years. The second article from August 28th gives plans for how the project will be shared with the community. In that article, 116 sketches are mentioned and will be on display at a meeting the following day, August 29. Dr. Osborne will share the slides of a similar project, assuming that would be Hollidaysburg, and how enthusiastic that community was about the project. Although not named, I'm pretty sure that was Hollidaysburg. The article makes it clear that the project is voluntary and its purpose is to beautify the downtown for the pleasure of tourists and residents. These are two of those original 1961 photos. Thanks to a generous donation to our photo archives from Jimmy George, we have the original 174 photos of the project. And they were extremely useful in putting together this discussion this evening. That donation occurred on March 21st, 2016. The history of Project 61 would not be nearly as complete without that donation. One of the things I found most interesting about doing the research for this talk was a chance to review downtown Carlisle as I remembered it as a youth. My wife and I moved to Maryland in 1966 and didn't return until 1996 to find Carlisle a very different place from the Carlisle we had left 30 years earlier. Some of these photos, I am sure, will bring back memories for many in this audience. Duttry's Shoes and Blumenthal's at 30 and 34 North Hanover were shown in the previous slide. Later you will see the sketch and current appearance of these buildings. Slide 8 is 118 North Hanover Street on the left and 126 North Hanover on the right. One of the things I found interesting about these pictures, and you'll see this evidence a little later on, there weren't trees downtown. That was part of the beautification project. So when they took their pictures, I had to dodge around trees to get modern day pictures. Littman's Shoes at 137 South Hanover Street, and the storefront and living quarters at 151 South Hanover Street. The Cochran and Allen Building, later Orstown Bank and now State Farm, at 22 South Hanover, and 36 South Hanover. I need to add here that in preparation for this talk, I did not talk to 1961 owners or current owners of these properties. So that would be an added level of research that could be done about this, would be to get input from them. I would like this presentation to be somewhat informal and encourage anyone in the audience who has knowledge about these buildings, either from 61 or any time between now and then, to please get your hand up and I'll recognize you. I also want to state that I have tried my best not to let my personal feelings about these buildings be part of the presentation. At times, I'm sure my personal preferences, ideas, and opinions will be inevitable. I couldn't resist showing these two pictures of two South Hanover Street buildings that have been removed. Second Presbyterian Church and Bowman's Department Store. In case of Bowman's, I in particular, as a young boy, remember the pneumatic tubes. How many remember the pneumatic tubes? That took, when you bought something, you put the money, the clerk put the money in the tube and it suddenly shot up to the office. It was fascinating for someone 10 or 12 years old. For those of you new to the area, the church is now the site of the Salvation Army. The church was torn down and Bowman's burned in 1964 and is now the site of Comfort Suite Hotel. The Sentinel reported on the progress being made as the project was implemented, and local businesses were quick to use the project for advertising and sales purposes, as you see on the right. I'll note on this page from the 1st of September that the article about the Kingsborough property on South Hanover Street was already being reported. The full view of that page shows that 4 local businesses were advertising their ability to assist with the project. It is unfortunate to note that the Kingsborough project looks just like that today with all the paint peeling off of it. So they got off to a good start, but somehow or other it didn't continue. The front door on the left of the photo is still in place, as are the decorative iron posts. We don't have copies of Dr. Osborne's drawings, as said, but they do appear in some of the articles in the Sentinel. Here are 2 that appeared in the Sentinel. Cirrus Cleaners at 113 West High Street is shown on the left, and Carlisle Building and Loan is shown on the right. 113 West High is now part of the new restaurant 113 Social. And the photo on the right at the top shows Richard Reed, Robert Einstein, and Roger Germain working on securing donors for the project. These are additional articles from 1961. On the left, 2 more Osborne drawings are shown, as well as advertising that relates to the project. The article on the right is an appeal to local property owners, even if not part of the 122 buildings initially identified, to support the project by examining their properties to see if they can fall in line with the Project 61 initiative. Project donors listed to date at that time included Mr. and Mrs. J.E. Worrell, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Anderson, Mr. and Mrs. Frankie Maslin, Mr. and Mrs. William K. Hartzell, Dr. and Mrs. Gilbert Malcolm, the United Telephone Company, the Carlisle Civic Club, the Carlisle Junior Chamber of Commerce, George's Flowers, Farmers Bank and Trust, the Carlisle Junior Civic Club, the Community Development Council, Frog Switch and Manufacturing Company, Carlisle Deposit Bank and Trust, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Seller, Dolphin Deposit Bank and Trust, William Morris, Carlisle Garden Club, Ms. Flora George, Mr. and Mrs. M.W. Allen, Mr. and Mrs. C.B. Strayer, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Chilton, J.P. Bixler and Sons, Coyle Lumber, Mr. and Mrs. Roger Todd, Mr. and Mrs. Uri D. Lutz, Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Ickes, and Reverend and Mrs. Roy Wenger, and Fred V. McDaniel. So you can see there was a lot of interest. Lots of the local leaders from the 60s were supporting this project. The project was being implemented by many businesses by the fall of 1961. These newspaper articles show 2 more Osborne drawings and the installation of the official Project 61 sign on the Early's Furniture Store's carriage house at the corner of South and West Streets. The 3 men pictured are John Garman, Robert Coick, and Kirby Burkholder. The Samuel Ickes property on South Hanover Street is shown on the right. Timken Billett's electric shop is housed on the first floor of the building. The full newspaper ad, a page from the previous slide, shows the efforts of local businesses to support and benefit the project. The close-up of the castle's advertisement lists the items they have to support the effort, including doors, window blinds, shutters, colonial-style windows, architectural trim, mantels, and cabinets. This October 30th article is about the Pennsylvania Power and Light building on East High Street. It mentions that the brick has been sandblasted as part of the Project 61 effort. It is interesting that some buildings painted their exteriors as part of the project, and others sandblasted them to get them back to their original surface. Other properties mentioned in the article that are participating include Malcolm M. Simons & Son on West High Street, Long's Lady Shop at 109 North Hanover Street, and Arthur Deckman on Church Avenue. Here are 2 of Richard Reed's concepts of a building on West High Street and another on North Hanover Street. I don't know how Reed and Osborne determined which buildings each would conceptualize. Most of Richard's are on North Hanover, and a few on South Hanover, and also a couple on East and West High Street. You can see that concepts incorporated included shutters, colonial moldings, and small paned windows. Items removed from most of the buildings, according to the drawings, included Victorian-style brackets on the upper cornices and removal of the large plate glass windows on storefronts. There are recommended change in signage to reflect a more colonial style as well. Some of the early descriptions of the intended drawings indicated that they were to be in color. However, none of the redrawings show intended color choices. Here are 2 more of the original photos that I could not resist using. One, of course, is our building on High Street, which now houses our gift shop. In '61, the first floor was still divided into 3 separate businesses. The other is the gas station that replaced the train station on West High Street. And that building has now also been removed and is now the temp office. Here are 2 more buildings on North Hanover Street as they appeared in 1961. Thompson's Bookstore and Royal Jewelers on the left at 33 North Hanover, and the adjacent building at 31 North Hanover Street housing the Cut Rate drugstore. This talk will mainly look at the buildings that Richard Reed conceptualized. 2 North Hanover Street in 1961 and as envisioned by Reed. He maintains the basic structure of the building but removes the awning and what appears to be stained glass above the awning. The bay windows are retained with 9/9 sash in each window. The storefront uses smaller pane windows. And this is that current view of that same building. And you can see basically the awning is gone. The other changes that were suggested have not been implemented. The building next door at 6 North Hanover in 1961 and as proposed. The awning has been removed and the Greenfield storefront modified with smaller pane windows in the display area and a colonial style entrance door. The signage for the business is suggested to be a separate colonial style post with a bracket showing the name of the business. The upper floors are modified with 6/9 windows and the original door and windows surrounds are preserved. However, this is what it's like today. I don't know if John Bruges, who was a part of Project 61 planning, considered those ideas when he did a thorough restoration of this building to its appearance in the 18th century. He used the interior of the first floor of the building for office space and the former storefront was totally removed. The business sign on the front of the building reflects the aims of Project 61, as does Bruges's phenomenal restoration. It's one of the best that was ever done in Carlisle. Crossing the street to 5 North Hanover Street in 1961, this slide shows Reed's vision for the building. The Epley's cut-rate awning is gone, and the storefront has been modified to include smaller paned windows. He maintains the basic building structure, but recommends 6/6 sash on the second and third floors, and makes effective use of a large bay window on the second floor. He recommended no changes to the original arched doors, which do date to the either colonial or early American era. When my wife and I were going around taking the modern day pictures, this is what it looked like a few weeks ago. However, I walked by it the other day. The pink doors are gone. They're now blue. I'm not sure what Richard would have thought of the pink doors, but I think he'd be happier with the blue ones. But the rest of his concept was not implemented. It's an interesting building architecturally regardless. 10 and 12 North Hanover as it appears today and as it was envisioned. It does not appear to me that Reed's vision was proposing many suggestions for changes. It's interesting that the large plate glass windows seem to stay in place, so that was not typical for his approach to these drawings. The usual, I already said that. There may have been some intention of using color to emphasize some of the architectural elements of the building. For example, the brick coins at the corners seem to stand out more in the drawing, and at the cornice at the top of the building seems to be more predominant. And for those of you who don't know what coins are, they're these things that stand out a little bit from the main body of the building. I thought everybody knew what coins were, but I keep running into people who don't, so I thought I'd better point them out. 15 North Hanover in 1961, and as envisioned, this small building has the usual treatment of changing the style of the display windows on the first floor. And 17 North Hanover as envisioned, and as it appears now. It's interesting that the owner of this building, where the antique shop is now, just replaced the entire front. Whether that intent had anything to do with Project 61, I do not know. But it certainly fits the theme of Project 61. And shutters were added. However, the small paned windows were not put in place. Returning to newspaper reports in the 1960s, implementation of the project continues to be reported. Here is a view of the growth of the project in 1962, and I noticed that Gettysburg is interested in what Carlisle is doing. Dr. Milton Osborne is also assisting Gettysburg with 125 color drawings, and the Junior Chamber of Commerce is supporting the effort. As in Carlisle, display of the drawings is planned. The article on the right shows a project at Bixler's Hardware in progress, and before and after photos of the Early's warehouse project. The 1962 article notes that 40 businesses are participating. Carlisle businesses are still advertising to support the project, according to the ads at the bottom of the page. The project continues in 1964. These articles show the implementation of the project at Sunnyside Restaurant well beyond the downtown scope of the project. Also shown is the placement of a Project 61 sign at Reeves Hoffman. The plaque was presented by Mayor Hartzell and Jimmy George to H.R. Potter. And again, local businesses are supporting the project through sales of items useful to those implementing the project. These articles in 65 and 66 show the continued implementation of the project. The article entitled More Carlisle Buildings Colonialized provides a look at the project 4 years into implementation. The article mentions several businesses and individuals that have participated, including Farmers Trust, Broad's Pharmacy, Dr. Herbert Halliday, PP&L, Bixler's Hardware, Mounts Jewelers, Dr. Herbert Levison, Lynn Phillips, the Fabric Center, and the Bridal Boutique. Dr. John Beck is noted in the article because he moved his office from the Woolworth building to the building at Walnut and South Streets, where he remodeled the building to Project 61 expectations. George Mounts is mentioned as having a way to enhance his jewelry store with wooden mullions to give the appearance of small pane windows inside the plate glass windows. The photo at the top is in recognition of tree planting on East North Street at the home of Mrs. Edna Keller. The property was owned by James Casey. The new Roth Funeral Home is also recognized with a plaque while still under construction. The article adds a piece of evidence not found earlier. Dr. Osborne had done 66 sketches for the project and Richard Reed 44. The photo on the right shows a Project 61 plaque being presented to the new owners of a gas station near MJ Mall. Note the noble barn in the top right of the slide as the new Elks Lodge receives a Project 61 recognition for its sensitive colonial design. The project continues to be reported in 1965. John Beck is shown outside the building he renovated at the corner of Hanover and Walnut Streets. Below that, Donald C. Reisinger receives his Project 61 plaque from William Hartzell and Jimmy George at the Reisinger Brothers Company on Claremont Road. This article from 1970 on the right makes note of the continued efforts being made with Project 60 in Hollidaysburg. In 1965, the committee included Mayor Hartzell, Jimmy George, John Bruges, George Lamer, Millard Landis, Pearson Miller, Dr. Milton Flower, Richard Reed, George Wickard, Richard Duttry, David Rogers, Robert Einstein, and Frank McCrae. In 1971, the 10-year anniversary of the project was being recognized. Buildings highlighted in the article include Burkholder Associates, South Streets Homes, BH Agency, Hoffman Apartments, followed Charlie Car Wash, and Old East. The article on the left mentions various artisans who participated in an arts and crafts show. Dr. Milton Osborne is recognized as a participant in the show. The death of Dr. Osborne is reported on the slide to the right side of the slide. He had been chair of the architecture department since 1946 until his retirement in 1962. So these projects were apparently something he was becoming involved with as he neared retirement. Projects mentioned in his obituary include Gettysburg, Carlisle, and Hollidaysburg. It is interesting that the projects were listed in the reverse order of their implementation. Project 61 in 1976 and in its 20th year in 1981. By this time, some concerns had begun to be expressed about the project. The community has begun to appreciate some of the downtown architecture that was not fully appreciated in 1961. Other styles of architecture were also being uplifted, for example, the Carlisle Theater on West High Street. The 1976 article notes that the project is not dead, but it has detractors. William Hartzell states that there is little drive to continue the effort. Retired Dickinson professor Milton Flower notes that Carlisle has many significant examples of federal and Victorian architecture that were not particularly valued in 1961. Preservation and uplifting of those styles is appropriate and better reflects the true nature of Carlisle's building stock. The 20-year retrospective notes that many newer residents of Carlisle find the Project 61 signs where they exist a complete mystery. Richard Reed is quoted as following in this article. He always had reservations about it, although he credits it with creating interest in the downtown's older buildings. William Hartzell comments in the article that the Project 61 signs were only designed to last a year in recognition of a property owner's efforts. He noted that they were popular and property owners valued the recognition they received when one was presented. Reed felt that the project's main value was to let property owners know that an older building was worth preserving. He recognized that achieving the goals of Project 61 in a town with building stock that was primarily Victorian was difficult. Toward the end, as this talk has shown, the plaques were being given out for buildings under construction, so the original attempt to address the appearance of the downtown business district had evolved. One of the potential outcomes of the increased interest in architecture, the Carlisle Historic District was formed and listed on the National Register of Historic Places. I don't know that there's a direct connection, but it sort of follows that maybe the discussion about architecture led to that.
Milton Flower's sister-in-law was very active in the historic district, so there was an influence.
She says that Milton Flower's sister-in-law was active in creating this, so Maureen feels it was an influence. Was this a direct result? Hard to know, but certainly it reflects on the purposes of Project 61. The Carlisle Architectural Review Board, affectionately, sometimes not affectionately, known as HARB, was part of this effort. At the same time, the Cumberland County Historical Society created the Cumberland County Register of Historic Places, a unique program for a county in Pennsylvania to offer. It builds on National Register procedures, but is much more user-friendly. Continuing with our review of the Project 61 drawings, the following series of slides will compare the 1961 photos, the Reed drawings, and the current status of these buildings. This first one is well known, Duttry's Shoe Store on North Hanover Street. Duttry's was one of the last traditional businesses to leave the downtown. Although currently not as necessarily envisioned by Reed, the building uses paint to emphasize architectural elements of the building, including those coins that I mentioned earlier. The current facade of this building at 31 North Hanover Street accentuates the architecture by painting the brick and highlighting the window surrounds and cornice using paint. Reed envisioned small pane windows on the second and third floors, and the first floor storefronts with a decided colonial appearance. The current owner has emphasized the Victorian elements of the second and third floors, including the cornice with double brackets. Another well-known business, Blumenthal's, later Wardecker's, is shown at 32 North Hanover. There's been a major shift in the use of color for this building. I'm relatively certain this is not what Project 61 had in mind, but it certainly matches the current business that's located there, Pliables. This is one of my favorite buildings in this series. There, I'm letting my opinions sneak in. This structure at 101 North Hanover always had balconies. Richard Reed took the concept of those existing 61 balconies and envisioned a full-scale view of the building as if it was from New Orleans. I just think it's so creative. I just really like it. As you can see, none of his vision was realized, although the current color of the building does make it more distinctive. And there's an example of one of those trees that made it difficult to get a good picture. The building at 109 North Hanover, shown on the left of the current view, adjusted the window design on the second floor, now housing Red's Barbecue Restaurant, maintains the original 1961 plate glass windows. The location of the store sign is the same as suggested by the Reed drawing. The colonial design was not adopted for the current Market Cross pub at 113 North Hanover. The addition of a wood shingle pent over the storefront, although not suggested by Reed, does reflect colonial design concepts, whether intentional or not. The use of color is evident. 118 North Hanover proposed added shutters and removed the upper Victorian brackets. The first floor included colonial style storefronts, and as you can see, little has changed. Brackets on the corners have been preserved, and the original natural brick is still in place. 126 North Hanover, the proposal was to remove the Victorian style window frames and the brackets on the cornice. The proposed front doors and the first floor storefront are to be in colonial mode. Note that the original door style is still in place. The window styles, I think I moved too soon. Let me back up.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go. Note that the original door style is still in place, the window styles remain the same, and the original storefront is still in place. Part of the beautification project also involved the planting of trees. This one blocks the view of the current building. A note about the current photos. This is a good example of one. The day that Ann and I went out to take these photos was a very nice, pleasant, sunny day, but 81 was closed. And there were just trucks constantly whizzing by. We could just barely get a shot before another truck got in the way. So that's why some of them are not quite as good as I would hope. "127 North Hanover was Sears Roebuck and Company. It is now JW Music. The building already had many colonial and early American features. Signage was to be hung on a colonial style sign from the building and the storefront modified. Adaptation of storefront was not implemented, and the current sign, JW Music, is in place of the Sears sign. 128 North Hanover was the home of Town and Country. The main suggested change was the first floor storefront. Little change was recommended for second and third floors, and the storefront concepts were not implemented. 132 North Hanover was Carlisle Hardware in 1961. To a limited degree, the first floor commercial space reflects some of the concepts of Project 61. It is difficult to tell if the concept of painting the brick was part of the colonial design, but it is clear that the brick facade has been painted. 129 North Hanover, one of the most dramatic changes, must have been an auto parts store or a hardware store in 61. Gasoline or some other commodity could be purchased at the pump in front of the building. The proposal added some decorative features, including a decorative fence above the first floor cornice. One of the most dramatic changes to the downtown is the current hook and flask. This was certainly not what Project 61 had. 141 North Hanover was the photo greeting store. It appears it had dark, probably red painted brick in 61. The proposal appears to suggest a change in color. The building now reflects a different color scheme. The original Victorian cornice brackets, which were removed in the proposal, have been preserved. 147 North Hanover. I could not find an original photo of this, but it appears that none of the Project 61 suggestions were followed. Schaefer Brothers at 159 North Hanover appears to have been a participant in Project 61. The addition of shutters and the modified storefront reflects some of the ideas from the project. A change in color scheme has been implemented. Victorian cornice brackets and the 2/2 window style has been retained. Moving on to South Hanover, we're back to Cochran and Allen. We saw that earlier. The main change is the removal of the painted brick. The storefronts have not been changed, and the building truly reflects its Victorian heritage. At some point, the recommended changes to the upper cornice have been implemented. The former Ewing Brothers Funeral Home on South Hanover Street is now the Carlisle House B&B. I became familiar with this building when I was doing my research for the book on the Babes in the Woods. Funerals for the three girls were held in this building. And it was the birthplace of the well-known Ewing twins. They were born up in that attic room on the third floor. It was faithfully restored by previous owners, and their restoration returned the building to its mid-19th century appearance. They also incorporated the building to the north in the business. The building at 36 East High had maintained its original federal appearance in 1961. There were minimal ideas suggested for change. The main addition was the suggestion of gas lights, flanking the entrance. It continues today to be an excellent example of what Project 61 was trying to achieve, which was to make many of the downtown buildings reflect an earlier appearance. Blair House at 143 West High had maintained its early American Federal appearance when it was the Elks Lodge. There were minimal suggestions for changes. The final slide of Reed's drawing is one that I couldn't resist putting in. It's 200 East High Street, if you can picture what that looks like now. Here, suggestions were made for modifying a gas station. The suggestions were not implemented. The original building remains in place, and it's been unoccupied for years. It's just there. It usually has stuff piled in the parking area. This final slide is one that I did not connect with Richard Reed at all, but it's some buildings on West High Street that, whether they intended or not, certainly reflect the ideas of Project 61. The most recent one, the Molly Pitcher Brewing Company, they completely took off the front of that and put a colonial or early American front on it. The bank, I think, was part of the original project. It had a really fascinating original design on the first floor, which probably, unfortunately, would be better if it had been kept. And then the building on the left also reflects. And this is the building that was pictured in your original postcard that you received. You can see that the Reed ideas were not implemented. However, that may not be a failure of Project 61 efforts, because it is a wonderful Victorian structure. And somebody, either through lack of foresight or through foresight, saw the advantage of keeping it. So what are the lasting effects of Project 61? I think it definitely led to, as Richard stated in that one newspaper article, an increased interest in early architecture in Carlisle and use of architecture to enhance commerce and tourism. The creation of the Carlisle Historic District is likely an outgrowth. The creation of the HARB, the Historical Architectural Review Board. The Cumberland County Register of Historic Places. And there have been a number of books on early residents and their homes that have been published that could have been an outgrowth. And the preservation and appreciation for a variety of architectural styles. And the downtown is now green. There are lots and lots of trees in the downtown area. So that concludes my remarks.